The day my son Michael handed me that invoice, printed on his company letterhead, itemized down to the last scratched floorboard, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. $10,250 for damages incurred during child care services rendered at primary residence. My hands were shaking so bad the paper rustled like leaves in a storm, and I looked up at my son, this man I'd raised in a 2-bedroom apartment in Detroit, this man whose diapers I'd changed and whose college I'd worked double shifts to help pay for, and I asked him if this was some kind of sick joke. If you've ever been taken for granted by the people you loved most, hit subscribe, because this story ends in a way that'll make you believe in standing up for yourself again. His wife Patricia stood behind him with her arms crossed, wearing yoga pants that cost more than my monthly electric bill, and said in that voice that always made me feel about 2 inches tall, "Joyce, we've been more than patient, but fair is fair. You need to take responsibility for your actions." My actions? 5 years of free childcare? 5 years of dropping everything when they called, of canceling my own plans, my own life, my own dreams of finally traveling after retirement? And now I was holding an invoice like I was some kind of contractor who'd trashed their precious house, instead of the grandmother who loved their children like they were my own heartbeat. Let me back up, because you need to understand how I got here. How a woman who raised 3 kids on a school secretary's salary, who never asked for anything from anybody, who took pride in being the one people could count on, ended up sitting in a lawyer's office at 68 years old, fighting her own son in court. My name is Joyce Matthews, and I'm not the kind of person who ends up in situations like this. I'm the peacemaker, the one who smooths things over at family dinners, who bites her tongue when my daughter-in-law makes her little comments about my cooking or my clothes or the fact that I still live in the same neighborhood where I raised my kids. I'm the grandmother who shows up with homemade cookies and patience, who never complains, who just loves her family and tries to help however she can. That's who I've always been. But sometimes being the peacemaker just means you're the one everyone feels comfortable stepping on. It started 5 years ago when Michael and Patricia had their first baby, my granddaughter Zoe. They lived in this massive house in the suburbs, one of those new developments where every house looks the same and costs more than I'd earn in 10 lifetimes. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a kitchen bigger than my entire first floor. Patricia had a high-powered job at some marketing firm, and Michael was climbing the corporate ladder at an accounting company. And they sat me down one Sunday after church and asked if I'd be willing to help with childcare. "Mom," Michael said, holding my hand like he used to when he was little and wanted something, "daycare around here costs almost $2,000 a month, and we just don't trust strangers with our baby. You raised 3 kids and they all turned out great. Would you consider watching Zoe a few days a week, just until she's old enough for preschool?" How do you say no to that? Your son asking you to spend time with your first grandchild. I was recently retired. My husband James had passed 2 years before, and honestly, I was lonely. My house felt too quiet, too empty. The thought of having a baby to care for again, of being needed, of being important to someone's daily life, it felt like a gift, not a burden. "Of course, sweetheart," I told him. "I'd love to help. You know I'd do anything for you and that precious baby." Patricia smiled, this tight little smile, and said, "We really appreciate this, Joyce. It'll be such a relief to know Zoe's with family." What she didn't say, what I didn't hear until much later, was that she also expected perfection, that she saw me not as a beloved grandmother helping out, but as free labor that she could control and criticize. Those first few months were actually beautiful, I'm not going to lie. 3 days a week, I drive the 30 minutes from my neighborhood to theirs, let myself in with the key they'd given me, and spend the day with baby Zoe. I fed her, changed her, sang her the same songs I'd sung to Michael when he was tiny. I rocked her to sleep and played peekaboo and documented every little milestone in a notebook because Patricia wanted detailed reports. When Zoe smiled for the first time, I was there. When she rolled over, took her first steps, said her first word, I was there for all of it. And it filled up the empty spaces in my heart that losing James had created. I loved that little girl like she was mine, and I thought I was doing something good, something that brought our family closer. Then came baby number 2. Lucas was born when Zoe was 18 months old, and suddenly 3 days a week became 5 days a week. Patricia went back to work after just 6 weeks of maternity leave, and they needed more help. Mom, I know it's a lot to ask, but we're in a bind here. Patricia's up for a promotion, and I just got assigned this huge account. Could you possibly do Monday through Friday, just for a while, until we figure out a more permanent solution? Just for a while. That's what he said 5 years ago. The permanent solution never came because why would it? I was free, reliable, and too afraid of causing family drama to set boundaries.
So I became a full-time grandmother nanny, except without the nanny's paycheck or respect. I'd arrive at their house by 7:30 every morning because Patricia had to be at work by 8 and couldn't handle the morning routine alone. I'd get Zoe dressed and fed while Patricia did her makeup, changed Lucas, and given his bottle while she checked her emails. Then they'd both leave, and I'd be alone with 2 babies in this big, cold house that never quite felt warm no matter how high they kept the thermostat. I'd spend all day caring for those kids, feeding them organic food that Patricia insisted on, following the strict schedule she'd printed out and laminated, doing the developmental activities she'd learned about in some parenting class for wealthy mothers who had more time to research than to actually parent. And I didn't complain. I didn't say a word when Patricia started texting me throughout the day with instructions and criticisms. Joyce, please make sure Zoe's vegetables are steamed, not microwaved. We're trying to preserve the nutrients. Joyce, Lucas's nap should be exactly 90 minutes. If he sleeps longer, he won't sleep tonight. Joyce, can you please wipe down the high chair more thoroughly? I noticed some residue this morning. Every text felt like a little paper cut, tiny on its own, but adding up to something that hurt more than I wanted to admit. But I told myself it was fine, that she was just particular, that being a working mother was stressful and I should be understanding. The thing is, I wasn't just watching the kids. Somehow, without anyone actually asking directly, my responsibilities expanded like water soaking into fabric. I'd do their dishes while the kids napped. I'd wipe down their counters, sweep their floors, throw in a load of laundry because I was already there and it needed doing. Patricia would leave notes. If you have time, could you unload the dishwasher? Or, would you mind folding the laundry in the dryer? Always phrased as requests, but we both knew they were expectations. And I did it all because that's what you do for family, right? You help. You don't keep score. You don't think about the fact that you're 63, 64, 65 years old and your back hurts from lifting toddlers and your knees ache from crawling around on their hardwood floors, playing cars and dolls. When baby number 3 came along, sweet little Emma, I should have said something. I should have sat them down and explained that caring for 3 children under 5 years old, 5 days a week, for free, was unsustainable. That I was tired, that I had my own life I'd put on hold, my book club that I'd quit because I was too exhausted to read, my church volunteer work that I'd stopped because I didn't have time, my friend Margaret, who kept inviting me on a trip to visit her daughter in Colorado, and I kept saying maybe next year because I couldn't leave the kids. But I didn't say anything. Michael looked so stressed, and Patricia made comments about how expensive childcare was, how they were already stretched thin with the mortgage and the car payments and the private preschool they'd enrolled Zoe in. And underneath all of that was the unspoken threat I felt but couldn't name. If I stopped helping, I'd lose access to my grandchildren. They'd find another solution, and I'd be demoted from essential to occasional. So I kept going, 5 days a week, 7:30 in the morning to 6:30 at night, sometimes later when they had work events or date nights. 11 hours a day, sometimes more. 55 hours a week. That's more than a full-time job, and I wasn't getting paid a dime. Actually, it cost me money. Gas for the daily commute, wear and tear on my 12-year-old Honda, the lunches I'd pack because I didn't feel comfortable eating their food without asking. I calculated it once, late one night when I couldn't sleep because my hip was bothering me from carrying Emma around all day. If I'd been paid minimum wage for those hours, over 5 years, they would have owed me over $100,000. But I wasn't doing it for money. I was doing it for love, for family, because that's what grandmothers do. The damages they're now claiming I caused happened gradually. The normal wear and tear of having 3 small children living their daily lives in a house that never quite felt warm, no matter how high they kept the thermostat. There was the hardwood floor in the playroom that got scratched when Lucas was learning to ride his tricycle inside because it was raining and Patricia didn't want them going stir-crazy. I told him to be careful, but he was 3 years old. Careful isn't exactly their strong suit. There was the wall in the kitchen where Zoe decided to be an artist with some marker she had found, which I cleaned off as best I could, but apparently not well enough because you can still see a faint blue tinge if you look closely. There was the living room carpet that got a stain when Emma's sippy cup leaked juice, even though I scrubbed that spot for 20 minutes on my hands and knees until my back screamed. Normal stuff. Life stuff. The kind of things that happen in homes where children actually live instead of being kept in pristine museums.
But Patricia documented everything. I didn't know this at the time, but she was taking photos, making notes, building a case like I was some kind of criminal instead of the woman who was raising her children for free. Every scuff mark, every tiny scratch, every wear pattern on the furniture from the kids climbing on it. She was recording it all. And I had no idea. No clue that while I was singing Itsy Bitsy Spider and wiping runny noses and breaking up toddler fights over toys, I was being surveilled like I was under investigation. The whole thing makes me feel sick when I think about it now. The calculation behind it, the cold planning while she smiled at me and said, "Thank you," and let me believe I was a valued member of their family team. The breaking point came 3 months ago, on a Tuesday that started like any other exhausting day. I arrived at 7:30, already tired because I hadn't slept well. At 68, everything hurts a little more. Takes a little longer to recover from. Emma had a cold and had been fussy all week. Lucas was going through a hitting phase that was making me crazy. Zoe, who was in kindergarten by then, had started talking back in this snippy way she'd clearly learned from her mother. I was overwhelmed, running on fumes. And when Patricia breezed out the door in her designer work clothes, she turned back and said, "Oh, Joyce, I'm having some colleagues over tomorrow evening for a dinner party. Would you mind doing a deep clean of the main floor today? Just vacuum really well, dust, maybe clean the bathrooms. I'd do it myself, but I just don't have time. And you're here anyway." Something in me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a thread that's been pulled too tight for too long. I looked at her, this woman who'd never once offered to pay me, who treated me like combination grandmother, servant, who was now asking me to deep clean her house while watching 3 kids so she could impress her work friends. And I said, "Patricia, I can't do that. I'm here to watch the children, not to clean your house for your party." Her face went hard, that smile dropping like a mask. "Excuse me? I thought you were here to help our family. This is helping." And I said, probably for the first time in 5 years, "No. I'm sorry, but no. I'm 68 years old, and watching 3 kids all day is already more than I should be doing. I can't deep clean your house, too." She didn't yell. Patricia never yells. She does something worse. She gets cold and controlled and mean in a way that's somehow more cutting than screaming. "Well," she said, drawing out the word, "I suppose we all have to set our boundaries, don't we? I'll keep that in mind going forward." Then she left, and I spent the whole day with a knot in my stomach, knowing I'd crossed some invisible line, but not sure what the consequences would be. The kids and I had an okay day. We made cookies, did some painting, read stories, normal grandma stuff.
But the whole time, I felt this dread, like I'd made a terrible mistake by finally saying no. That evening, when Patricia and Michael both came home together earlier than usual, I knew something was up. They asked if we could talk after the kids were in bed, their voices serious and formal. We sat in their living room, me on the couch I'd cleaned Cheerios out of 1,000 times, them across from me like I was being called to the principal's office. Michael looked uncomfortable, wouldn't meet my eyes. Patricia did all the talking. "Joyce, we've been discussing this and we think it's time for a change. The kids are getting older and we feel like they need a more structured, professional childcare environment. We're going to be enrolling them in a program starting next month." I should have felt relieved. 5 years of free labor ending. That should have been good news. But instead, I felt heartbroken. Those kids were my daily life, my purpose. "Oh," I managed to say. "Well, I'll miss them terribly, but I understand if you think that's best." I expected that to be it. Maybe some awkwardness, but eventual return to normal grandma visits. I didn't expect what came next. Patricia pulled out a folder, the kind you use for important documents, and slid it across the coffee table. "Before we make this transition, we need to address some concerns we have about the condition of our home."
I opened that folder, and inside was a full-color printed document, professionally formatted with photos and itemized descriptions. 23 items, each with a photo, a description of the damage, and an estimated repair cost. The scratched hardwood floor, $1,200 to refinish. The marker-stained wall, $400 to repaint the kitchen. The carpet stain, $800 for professional deep cleaning or section replacement. On and on it went, including things I didn't even remember or know about. A loose cabinet hinge, $800 for professional deep cleaning or section replacement. On and on it went, including things I didn't even remember or know about. A loose cabinet hinge, $75. Worn spots on the sofa fabric, $1,200 for reupholstering. Scuff marks on the baseboards throughout the house, $600 for repainting. The total, calculated at the bottom in bold, $10,250. "I don't understand," I said, my voice sounding far away. "These are just normal wear and tear from the kids. I didn't deliberately damage anything." Patricia's face was stone. "Joyce, we trusted you to care for our home as well as our children. This level of damage is honestly unacceptable. We've consulted with a property assessor, and this is the fair market cost of repairs." Michael finally spoke, his voice quiet. "Mom, we're not trying to be harsh, but this is a lot of damage. We think it's only fair that you contribute to fixing it." Fair. That word again. I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised to be kind, to be fair himself, and I couldn't recognize him in this stranger demanding money for scratched floors caused by his own children. "Michael," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I've been watching your children for free, 55 hours a week, for 5 years. Do you have any idea what that would have cost you if you'd paid for childcare?" Patricia cut in, her voice sharp. "We didn't ask you to do that. You offered. You wanted to spend time with your grandchildren. Don't act like you were doing us some huge favor. You benefited too." And that's when I realized the depth of how differently we'd viewed this arrangement. To me, I'd been sacrificing, helping, giving up my retirement years to serve my family out of love. To them, I'd been getting free entertainment, access to grandchildren I should be grateful for, like they were doing me the favor. The gap between those two realities was so wide I felt dizzy looking across it. "I need to go," I said, standing up on shaky legs. "We can discuss this later." Patricia's voice followed me to the door. "We'll need a response by the end of the week, Joyce. This isn't something we're just going to forget about." I drove home crying so hard I had to pull over twice. I sat in my little house, the one I'd raised 3 kids in, the one that was paid off, but needed repairs I couldn't afford on my fixed income. And I felt so stupid. Stupid for thinking I was building something with them. Stupid for sacrificing my time and energy and health. Stupid for not setting boundaries or asking for anything in return. Not even respect. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about all those hours, all those days, all those times I'd said yes when I wanted to say no. All those moments with my grandchildren that were now tainted by this invoice, sitting on my kitchen table like a snake. The next morning, I called my daughter Shanice. She's my middle child, a nurse with 3 kids of her own who she manages to raise while working full-time, and somehow still maintaining her sanity and sense of humor. I told her everything. The 5 years, the invoice, the cold way Patricia had presented it, like I was a contractor who'd done substandard work. Shanice was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Mama, I love you, but I've been watching this happen for years and biting my tongue. They've been using you, and now they're trying to make you pay for the privilege of being used? You need to get a lawyer." "Baby, I can't afford a lawyer," I said, which was true. My retirement income was enough to live on modestly, but there wasn't room for legal fees. "Then get a free consultation at least," she insisted. "There are lawyers who do elder exploitation cases." "Mama, that's what this is. You know that, right? This is financial exploitation." I'd never thought of it that way. Financial exploitation was something that happened to confused old people who got scammed by strangers on the phone, not to competent grandmothers helping their families. But sitting there looking at that invoice, I started to wonder if maybe she was right. I found a lawyer named Rebecca Chen who specialized in elder law and family exploitation cases. Her office offered free consultations, so I made an appointment, feeling embarrassed and ashamed, like I was tattling on my own family. I brought the invoice, and I also brought something else. A calendar where I'd been tracking my days with the kids, not for any legal reason, but just to remember the sweet moments. Doctor's appointments I'd taken them to, sick days I'd handled, nights I'd stayed late. Rebecca looked through everything, her expression getting more serious. "Mrs. Matthews, do you realize that over 5 years, at 55 hours per week, you provided approximately 14,300 hours of childcare?" I hadn't done that math, but hearing it made my stomach hurt. $286,000? The number hit me like a physical blow. $286,000? Even accounting for the fact that they were family and I did it out of love, the sheer value of what I'd given was staggering compared to the $10,250 they were demanding I pay them. "Now," Rebecca continued, "let's talk about these damages. Every single item on this list is normal wear and tear from children living in a home. Legally, they would have an extremely difficult time proving you were negligent or deliberately caused damage. This invoice is frankly bullshit."
Hearing a lawyer say that made me feel less crazy. "What can I do?" I asked. "Well, first, you're not paying this," she said firmly. "Second, we're going to send them a response that outlines the value of services you provided and makes it very clear that if they want to pursue this legally, we'll be filing a counterclaim for unpaid wages." My eyes went wide. "I don't want to sue my son." Rebecca's face softened. "I understand. But Mrs. Matthews, they're already suing you in a sense. They're making a legal demand for payment. You have a right to defend yourself." We drafted a letter together. It was professional but firm, stating that I would not be paying the invoice, that the alleged damages were normal wear and tear from their own children, and that if they chose to pursue legal action, I would be forced to counterclaim for the fair market value of childcare services provided. The letter included a breakdown of hours and costs that made my 5 years of service very real and very quantifiable. Rebecca suggested I also include a paragraph about the emotional impact, So I added a line about how hurt I was that my sacrifice of love was being treated as a business transaction, and that I hoped we could resolve this as a family rather than through courts. Michael called 2 days after receiving the letter. His voice was tight, angry in a way I'd rarely heard. "Mom, what the hell? You're threatening to sue us?" I took a deep breath. "No, honey. You threatened me first with that invoice. I'm just defending myself." He sputtered, and I could hear Patricia in the background saying something I couldn't make out. "We weren't threatening you. We just wanted you to take responsibility." And something in me, something that had been building for 5 years, finally broke open. "Michael Anthony Matthews, I took responsibility for your children for 5 years. I gave up my retirement, my health, my own life to raise those kids while you and Patricia built your careers. I loved those babies like they were mine, and I never asked for a dime. And now you want me to pay you because your floors got scratched by the children I was watching for free." There was silence on the other end. Then quietly, "Mom, it's not like that." "Then what is it like, baby? Explain it to me, because right now it feels like you used me up and now you're trying to squeeze me for more." I heard him take a shaky breath. "Patricia says, she says you should have been more careful, that if we'd hired a professional nanny, they would have prevented this damage." And there it was. If they'd hired a professional nanny, that nanny would have cost them nearly $300,000 over 5 years. Instead, they got me for free and were still complaining about the value. "A professional nanny would have cost you about $1,500 a week," I said, my voice hard. "I cost you nothing. And I loved your children, which no amount of money can buy. If that's not enough for you and Patricia, then I don't know what else to say." Michael was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I need to think about this." Then he hung up. I didn't hear from him for 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which I didn't see my grandchildren, didn't get any updates, was cut off completely. Shanice would give me occasional reports. She'd driven by and seen the kids playing in the yard, so I knew they were okay. But I wasn't allowed to be part of their lives anymore. The punishment for daring to stand up for myself was exile. It hurt worse than anything I'd been through since losing my husband. Those kids were my heart, and not seeing them, not knowing how they were, not being able to tuck them in or read them stories, it was agony. But I didn't back down. Rebecca had taught me something important, that love shouldn't require you to destroy yourself, that healthy families don't exploit each other and then demand payment for the privilege, that I had value, and my time had value, and the work I'd done had value, even if I'd done it out of love instead of for money. I started filling my days with things I'd given up. I rejoined my book club and discovered I'd missed 4 really good novels. I started volunteering at church again, helping with the food pantry on Wednesdays. I called my friend Margaret and said yes to that Colorado trip. I started living my own life, and while I missed my grandchildren desperately, I also felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years: lightness. The resolution came from an unexpected source. Michael's younger sister, my daughter Shanice, organized a family intervention. She invited Michael and Patricia to Sunday dinner at her house and told them I'd be there too. I almost didn't go, didn't want the confrontation, but Shanice insisted. "Mama, this has to end. Those kids need their grandmother, and Michael needs to hear some truths he's been avoiding." So I went, my stomach in knots, and found myself sitting across a table from my son and daughter-in-law for the first time in a month.
Shanice didn't let anyone ease into it. She put a printout on the table, the same calculations Rebecca had done, showing the value of services I'd presided. Then she looked at Michael and said, "Big brother, I love you, but you need to understand what you did. Mama gave you almost $300,000 worth of free childcare. She sacrificed her health, her social life, her retirement dreams, and you're trying to charge her $10,000 because your kid scratched your floors while she was raising them for free? Do you understand how messed up that is?" Patricia started to speak, but Shanice held up her hand. No, let me finish. I pay for childcare. You know what it costs me? $1,200 a month for my 3 kids, and that's at a church daycare that's subsidized. You have 3 kids and you paid nothing for 5 years. If Mom had been charging you even half the market rate, you would have paid her over $140,000. Instead, you paid her zero and are now demanding she pay you. That's not just unfair, that's cruel. I watched Michael's face as the numbers sank in, watched him do the mental math, watched the reality of what they'd asked of me and how they'd treated me start to penetrate. His eyes got shiny, and he looked at me with something that might have been shame. Mom, I didn't think of it that way. Shanice wasn't done. And another thing, those kids need their grandma. Zoe asked me last week why Grandma Joyce doesn't love them anymore. That's what you're teaching them, that Grandma disappeared because she doesn't love them. How do you think that's affecting them? That broke something in Michael. He put his head in his hands and his shoulders shook. Patricia looked uncomfortable, caught between defending her position and recognizing they were losing this battle. Finally, Michael looked up at me, tears on his face. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We were wrong. Patricia and I were so wrapped up in our own stress and expenses that we lost sight of what you were giving us. And then when we saw the damage to the house, we weren't thinking clearly. We were wrong. It wasn't enough. Not yet. I looked at Patricia, waiting. She met my eyes, and for the first time, maybe ever, I saw actual emotion instead of calculation. Joyce, I'm sorry too. I think I was resentful that you made it look so easy, that the kids loved you so much, and I took advantage of your generosity because it made my life easier, but I never properly appreciated it, and I definitely shouldn't have made that invoice. That was cruel, and I'm ashamed of it. The thing about being a mother is that you want to forgive. You want to believe in redemption and second chances. But I'd also learned something in these months of standing up for myself. Forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. I appreciate the apology, I said carefully, but things can't go back to how they were. I'm not doing 5 days a week, 11 hours a day anymore. I'm 68 years old and I have my own life to live. I love those children with everything in me, but I can't sacrifice myself completely anymore. Michael nodded quickly. We understand. We've actually enrolled them in a program, like we said. But Mom, we want you in their lives. We want them to know their grandma. Could you maybe do 1 day a week, just for fun, not as childcare? Like Saturdays, we could bring them over to your place and you could spend the day together. I thought about it, about having my grandchildren without the burden of full-time responsibility, about being grandma instead of free childcare. I'd like that, I said, but I have some conditions.
I pulled out my own list, one I'd made with Rebecca's help. First, no more expectations of housework or cooking for you all. If I watch the kids, it's just about the kids. Second, no more last-minute calls expecting me to drop everything. We schedule time together in advance and stick to it unless there's a real emergency. Third, you pay for anything the kids need while they're with me. Food, activities, supplies. I'm on a fixed income and I can't be subsidizing their care. And fourth, we never ever have a conversation about damages or payment again. What I did out of love, and it stays that way. Michael agreed immediately. Patricia took a moment longer, but she nodded too. That's fair. More than fair, actually. And slowly, over the next few months, we rebuilt something. Not the same relationship. That was gone, burned up in the fire of that invoice and the exploitation I'd finally recognized. But something new, something with boundaries and respect. I see my grandchildren every Saturday now. They come to my house and we bake cookies and go to the park and do crafts. When they leave, I'm tired but happy instead of exhausted and resentful. I've taken that trip to Colorado with Margaret. I'm reading books again, volunteering again, living again. Michael and I are slowly healing, though there's scar tissue that wasn't there before. He understands now what they asked of me, and sometimes I catch him looking at me with the sadness, like he's mourning the mother he took for granted. Patricia and I will never be close. We're cordial now, respectful, but the warmth is gone, and I don't think it's coming back. But that's okay. Not all relationships are meant to be close. Some are just meant to be functional and boundaried. The biggest surprise came 3 months ago when a check arrived in the mail, $5,000, with a note from Michael. Mom, this doesn't come close to what we owe you, but please accept this as a gesture of genuine apology and appreciation. Use it for yourself, for something that brings you joy. Love, Michael. I cried when I read it, not because of the money, but because it meant he finally understood. I used part of it to fix my own house, the repairs I'd been putting off. The rest I'm saving for a trip to visit my cousin in North Carolina, something I've wanted to do for years but never made time for because I was too busy raising someone else's children. If you're still reading this, if you've made it through my whole long story, I want to tell you something important. If you're a grandmother or grandfather being asked to provide free childcare, please learn from my mistakes. Set boundaries from the beginning. It's okay to say no. It's okay to ask for gas money or grocery reimbursement. It's okay to have a schedule that respects your own time and energy. Love shouldn't cost you your health, your savings, your retirement dreams. Family shouldn't exploit family, and if they try to, you have every right to push back. You are valuable. Your time is valuable. Your energy is valuable. Don't let anyone, not even your own children, convince you otherwise. I'm 68 years old now, and I'm finally living for myself again. I love my grandchildren fiercely, but I love myself too, and that's not selfish. That's survival. My son tried to charge me $10,000 for damages caused by his own children in his own house while I was providing nearly $300,000 of free childcare. The audacity of that still takes my breath away sometimes. But it also taught me the most important lesson of my later years, that standing up for yourself, even when it costs you relationships, even when it hurts, even when you're terrified of the consequences, is always worth it. Always. Drop a comment if you know what it feels like to give everything and still be told it wasn't enough. My name is Joyce Matthews, and I survived being exploited by my own family. I survived the guilt they tried to make me feel for having boundaries. I survived the isolation they imposed when I dared to say no. And I came out the other side stronger, clearer, more certain of my own worth than I've ever been. If my story helps even one person recognize their own exploitation and find the courage to stand up for themselves, then every hard moment of the past year was worth it. You deserve respect. You deserve appreciation. You deserve to live your own life, even if you're a grandmother, especially if you're a grandmother. Don't let anyone tell you different.